Welcome to your deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going deep into the world of propaganda.
Yeah.
We're going to go from like World War II radio waves all the way to like today's YouTube influencers.
Right.
And get ready to have your mind blown because we're going to uncover how easy it is for people outside forces, I guess you could say, to shape our opinions without us even knowing it.
It's a fascinating and scary world out there.
It really is.
The tactics have evolved.
Right.
But the goal is the same.
Yeah.
It's to change public opinion.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into some really like specific examples today.
Yeah.
But first, let's rewind the clock back to like 1942.
Okay.
World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Americans are like glued to their radios. Everyone wants to know what's going on.
Right.
And there's this radio show called Station Debunk. And they're promising listeners like uncensored, unbiased American coverage of the war. Sounds pretty good, right?
Sounds very straightforward.
Yeah, but here's where it gets interesting. So the host, who goes by the name Joe Scanlon, had a very like peculiar way of presenting the news, especially when it came to President Roosevelt.
Okay.
Turns out Joe Scanlon, not his real name.
Yeah.
Surprise. His real name was Herbert John Bergman.
Okay.
And he was an American economist.
Oh, okay.
But he was living in Berlin.
Interesting.
And get this, he was on the Nazi payroll.
What?
Yeah.
Oh.
So he was literally being paid by the Nazis to spin yarns on the American airwaves.
I mean, how much was he getting paid?
He was getting paid 9 times the average German wage at the time.
Wow.
Which tells you how important like his supposed insider viewpoint was to the Nazi propaganda efforts.
That's a lot of money.
It really is. So I'm curious, what kind of stuff was he actually telling the American public on this Station Debunk?
Right.
Was it like super blatant, like, you know, we're Nazis, we're coming for you? Or was it a little more subtle than that?
It was a blend. He would play music to kind of create that camaraderie.
Right.
And then he would launch into these anti-Roosevelt rants. He would claim that Americans were against the war. He even would sprinkle in some anti-Semitic and racist remarks. And it was all very much designed to stir up discontent.
Wow.
And really undermine the war effort.
So basically, like, the Nazis used this guy disguised as like this all-American, like, you know, radio personality to try and turn Americans against their own government and against the war effort.
Right.
It's crazy. It makes you wonder, though, like, did people actually buy it? Did they actually believe this guy?
Right, and that's the question. And it's easy to think, oh, of course they didn't, you know. But you have to think about the media landscape back then.
Right.
I mean, there was no internet.
No.
There was no 24/7 news.
No social media.
People relied on the radio for news and entertainment. So it's not crazy to think that, you know, some people, maybe those who already had doubts about the war,
Yeah.
maybe they were taken in.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, it's a good reminder that propaganda doesn't need everyone to believe it.
Right.
Like, if it just plants a seed of doubt,
Exactly.
or if it reinforces some like bias that you already have, then it's done its job.
Right.
Do we know, like, did Station Debunk actually have like a measurable impact though?
Unfortunately, it's really hard to say. We don't have like public opinion polls from back then that could tell us definitively how effective this was. We have to rely on the historical context.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Nazis did invest a lot of money and time into this.
They did.
Which suggests that they thought it was worth it.
Yeah, even if they swayed a small percentage of people.
Exactly.
That's still something.
Yeah, that's still a win for them.
Right. And it's just, it's kind of a chilling example of how foreign powers, they can use these like seemingly homegrown voices to push their own agendas. And what's really unsettling is that this is still going on today.
Oh, yeah.
It hasn't gone away. It's just changed.
It's evolved.
Instead of shortwave radio, now we're talking social media, influencers, even like seemingly independent news outlets. It really makes you stop and think, like, where am I getting my information from?
Yeah. Who are you listening to?
Exactly. And to illustrate that even further, one of the most like prominent examples of this in the 21st century is the rise of Russia Today, or RT.
Right.
And this is where we really see propaganda evolving and adapting to the internet age. Russia Today or RT.
Right.
I feel like I've definitely seen like, stuff from them online.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They're always like, they've got a take on things, especially when it comes to like international affairs, geopolitics, that kind of thing.
Right.
So give us the rundown. What is RT? Is it just like straight up propaganda, or is there more to it than that?
It's a really interesting case. So yeah, they were launched in 2005 by the Russian government.
Okay.
But they wanted to be seen as like the alternative. They didn't want to be your typical like stuffy, state-run media outlet.
Right.
They wanted to capture a global audience.
Interesting.
And really appeal to people who maybe were disillusioned by mainstream media. Like that was their target.
Okay. So how do you go from like state-run to like the alternative? Like how do you make that transition?
Branding, messaging, really smart about it. I mean, you remember their slogan, right? Question more?
I do, yeah. It's very catchy.
Super catchy, and it played right into that kind of like, don't take things at face value. We're the ones like asking the tough questions.
Yeah.
The ones that, other outlets are afraid to ask. So they position themselves as this voice of dissent, right?
Okay. Yeah, I could see how that would appeal to people, especially today. Like, where we get information from like a million different directions.
Mm.
A million.
You don't know who to trust.
Right.
And so to have someone like come in and say like, hey, question more.
Question it all.
Don't just believe everything you hear.
Exactly.
I could see that being appealing to people. And did it work? Like, were they able to gain any traction?
They did, yeah. They established bureaus all over the globe. They hired journalists from all different countries.
Wow.
And they started producing content that was, it was polished, it was engaging, and it was often very, very critical of Western governments, especially the U.S.
Interesting.
They really tapped into kind of like that vein of, anti-establishment sentiment. That was already there.
Yeah.
And they rode that wave.
It seems like, though, that they're kind of playing both sides here. So they're, on the one hand, they're being openly critical of, like, the West, let's say the U.S.
Mm.
But at the same time, like, they're funded by the Russian government.
Right. So how did that go over? Like, did Western governments just kind of like let them do their thing? Or...
Well, so in 2017, the U.S. government, under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, you might have heard of it, FARIRA.
I have, yeah.
They basically required RT and their journalists to register as foreign agents.
Okay, so for people who aren't familiar with that term, what does it actually mean, like to be designated as a foreign agent under a FARIRA?
It's basically like a transparency tool. It's meant to kind of let the public know, hey, this person, this organization, whatever, they're engaging in activities, whether it's lobbying or disseminating information on behalf of a foreign government.
Right.
So by making RT register under FARA, the U.S. government was basically trying to say, look, these guys are tied to the Russian government.
Mm-hmm.
Be aware of that when you're consuming their content.
Transparency. Okay.
Right.
So how did RT react to that, to being told, like, hey, you got to register as a foreign agent?
They weren't thrilled.
I would imagine not.
They claimed it, like, infringed on press freedom and all this, but ultimately, they did comply.
Okay.
They registered. But then, of course, things escalated in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Right.
And at that point, a lot of Western countries, the U.S. included, they decided to block RT entirely.
Wow.
Citing concerns about, potential disinformation, propaganda related to the conflict, basically saying we don't trust these guys to report on this objectively.
And that's where I think a lot of people probably, like, if they know about RT, that's probably when they first heard about them.
Probably.
Because it was a whole thing, right?
It was huge.
It sparked like a big debate about censorship, freedom of the press,
right,
the role of government, and like, controlling information. Like, where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
It's a very like complicated issue, I think, for a lot of people.
Oh, it's really tricky. It's like, on the one hand, you've got these legitimate concerns about, a state-sponsored media outlet potentially, spreading propaganda.
Right.
But on the other hand, you've got, these arguments about freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and the dangers of censorship.
Yeah.
So finding that balance, it's really hard.
It's tough. And it's interesting because it kind of highlights how the battleground for influencing public opinion, it's really shifted.
Yeah.
It used to be radio waves, like we were talking about with Station Debunk.
Right.
But now it's the internet.
It's online. It's everywhere.
It's this vast, landscape.
And a lot of it is a lot more subtle.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's not as in your face as, like, a radio program. funded by the Nazis.
It's a lot more like, it can be disguised as something else.
Right. And this is where like the whole influencer thing comes in.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, are you suggesting that some of these YouTubers that we watch, some of these people with like millions of subscribers, are they like witting or unwitting participants in a larger like propaganda machine?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it's not something you really think about when you're like, watching a YouTube video.
Right.
But I mean, are there actual examples of this happening where YouTubers are being used as like, pawns in a bigger propaganda game?
So there's this one case that really kind of highlights this new frontier, I guess you could say, of propaganda. And it involves a couple of names you might recognize. Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, big names in the kind of like online political commentary world.
Oh, yeah, millions of subscribers.
Millions, yeah. So this actually starts with a theory, and it was actually Tim Pool himself who put it forward.
He was suggesting that, foreign governments, they could use YouTube to spread propaganda in a way that was like really hard to trace.
Okay. So how would that even work? How do you like manipulate a platform like YouTube without anyone realizing it?
Subtlety.
Okay.
It's all about subtlety.
Okay.
So imagine, right, you've got, let's say, Russia.
Okay.
They want to push a certain narrative.
Okay.
So what they do is they identify these YouTubers, these influencers, whose views already kind of like align with what they're trying to say.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But instead of like directly controlling their content, they just amplify it.
I see. So it's like, it's not about like telling them what to say. It's just about like taking what they're already saying and just like making it louder.
Exactly. Yeah.
Boosting the signal.
Okay. So how do you do that? Like if you're, let's say, a foreign government and you want to like discreetly support a YouTuber, like how do you funnel that support?
So one way is through things like Google AdSense.
Okay. Which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's basically how a lot of, websites and YouTubers, they make money.
Right, through ads.
Through ads, exactly. So the more views, the more engagement they get, the more money they make.
Right.
So you could see how a foreign government could potentially like, game that system.
Right, yeah. Funnel money to certain YouTubers, get their videos seen by more people.
Exactly.
Okay. So did that actually happen with Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, any of these guys?
Here's where it gets juicy. So in 2023, a company called Tenet Media, claiming to be funded by this like wealthy guy named Edward Gregorian, reached out to a bunch of these right-wing influencers, Pool, Johnson included, and they offered them a deal, $100,000 per video to create content for Tenet Media.
Okay, $100,000, that'll get you to make a video or two.
Right.
So what do they want these videos to be about?
So the content, it wasn't like, radically different from what these guys were already talking about. It was, critiques of U.S. foreign policy, skepticism about U.S. aid to Ukraine. Basically arguing for a more like hands-off approach to the whole Russia-Ukraine situation.
Okay. So kind of like if you were Russia, you'd be like, yeah, I like the sound of that.
Exactly. Conveniently aligned.
Yeah. But so on the surface, it just seems like, oh, these guys are just, doing their usual thing, expressing their opinions. But you're saying there's more to it. So who's this Edward Gregorian guy? And what is Tenet Media? I never even heard of him.
And that's because Edward Gregorian, not a real person, made up, completely fabricated, and Tenet Media, also not what it seemed. Turns out both of them, they were created by former employees of, you guessed it, Russia Today, RT.
Are you kidding me? So you're telling me that Russian state media was behind this whole thing? Like they created this fake company, this fake billionaire, to funnel money to American YouTubers to push like pro-Russia talking points.
You got it.
That's insane.
It's like something out of a movie. And get this, the U.S. Justice Department actually got involved.
Really?
They launched an investigation. They ended up indicting the people behind this whole scheme. They said that over $10 million was funneled to these influencers.
Over how long?
Over about a year.
A year? $10 million in 1 year. That's a lot of money.
It is.
So what about the YouTubers themselves, like the ones who took the money and made these videos? Did they know?
That's the $1 million question. They all denied knowing about the Russian connection.
Okay.
They said, hey, we were misled. We thought this was a legit company.
Right.
We thought this guy Edward was who he said he was.
Yeah.
We believe in free speech, independent media. That was their story.
So it's kind of their word against, the evidence.
Exactly.
And without, without being able to, like, read their minds, I guess. We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But it is still, it's crazy because regardless of whether they knew or not, like these videos, they were seen by millions of people.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so concerning, right? Because it shows you how propaganda has evolved. It's not just about, these like in-your-face messages.
Right.
It's subtle, it's disguised.
It's sneaky.
It's very sneaky, and it can be really, really hard to spot.
So, I mean, what do we do like, as people who, like, we watch YouTube videos, we're online, like, are we supposed to be suspicious of everyone with an opinion? Like, are we supposed to be like, oh, who are they funded by? Like, I don't know. It seems like a lot.
I wouldn't say you have to be suspicious of everyone. It's more about just cultivating a healthy skepticism, right?
Gotcha.
Don't just take everything at face value.
Okay.
Especially, like you said, when it's someone who's consistently pushing a very specific agenda.
Right.
Think about, like, who benefits from you believing this?
Okay.
Is there another side to this story?
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah, try to break out of your echo chamber a little bit.
Yeah, get outside your bubble.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think, I mean, the big takeaway here is to be aware, right? Like to know that this is going on.
Absolutely.
But that there are these forces out there trying to shape, what we think, how we see the world.
All the time.
And the best defense is knowledge. Like, once you know how it works, you're less likely to be fooled by it.
Exactly.
It's like that old saying, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
That's it, yeah.
So that's our deep dive into the world of propaganda.
From the radio waves to the algorithms.
From station debunk to YouTube influencers.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. It's a trip. And I think the main thing I've learned is to be cautious, to be critical, to ask questions.
Always be questioning.
Always be questioning. And if something seems, too good to be true, or if it just, like, really aligns with, like, your existing biases, maybe give it a second thought. Do a little digging. And on that note, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.